I'm Rachel Cottam, and this is the Allies at Work podcast. Here, you'll discover bite-sized tactics that you can start using today to improve gender equity in your workplace, home, and community. You'll hear from diversity experts, as well as the ordinary folk who are doing the day-to-day work of allyship. Today's episode is an introduction to the podcast, so I want to share with you a little bit of my story and why I'm so passionate about men getting involved with gender equality. You'll also hear from my husband, Carlin Cottam, who has been the stay-at-home dad and primary caregiver for our 3 children for the past 4 years, after the cost of childcare forced us to get creative about the roles we play in our family. And finally, at the end of the episode, I'll share an allyship microaction, something you can start doing as soon as you're done listening. Allyship is a massive concept, and sometimes we don't know where to start. Whether you're a business leader or an individual contributor, these tactics will help you be a better ally at work. Today's allyship action is Name Your Privilege. We'll get into the details soon. Thanks for being here. When my husband and I got married 12 years ago, we imagined a different life. Our religious culture, despite its many strengths, said that a woman's primary role was in the home. That expectation fundamentally shaped my career goals by telling me my profession was secondary to marriage and children. I chose a mom job, teaching high school and freelancing while we struggled to make ends meet. My husband and I were desperately trying to fulfill the roles our culture prescribed for us, but destiny, or doggedness, kept pushing us the other way. With $87 in our bank account and 2 hungry toddlers to feed, I decided to leave cultural expectations behind. I got a job at a local startup. Honestly, I expected to quit in a few months once we were back on our feet. I expected that my husband would be back to serving his, quote, patriarchal duty. But the harder I worked, the more I saw an opportunity to improve the quality of life for our family. And maybe if I really worked at it, a chance to make a difference in the world. Within 3 years, I'd gone from a part-time copywriter to the director of a 24-person content team. We never would have reached that level of financial stability without partnership and sacrifice. I still remember sitting on the couch in our basement apartment trying to do the impossible math of childcare with 2 working parents, when my husband looked at me and said, "Well, what if I stay home with the kids for a while?" With a 3rd child on the way, my husband became the primary caregiver for our family, and I became the sole breadwinner. My husband's choice to take full-time care of our littles is a sacrifice, a show of courage. Here he is, my husband, stay-at-home dad, independent writer and illustrator, and my #1 male ally, Carlin Cottam. Talk to me about being a stay-at-home dad. What's different than you expected?
The snarky response is the boredom, which is maybe not the best way to start.
Preach.
Well, let me get into it. The deep relationship you can have with your kid as a stay-at-home parent is really something I knew about, like my relationship with my stay-at-home parent, my mom. And I think you've talked about this before on your different platforms, is like I called to my mom when I was scared or needed something at night. And oftentimes my kids call to me at night. And that's something I didn't completely understand until I was a stay-at-home parent, that deeper connection with your kid. But yeah, I'll go back to the boredom. There is a monotony. I mean, I realized I didn't need to know what day of the week it was until my kids started school. And that was weird. And, the monotony is still there. But for me, just the understanding of the need to define yourself beyond being a stay-at-home parent. Your kids shouldn't have to shoulder the burden of being your purpose, your personality, your reason for being. And don't get me wrong, they are, right? Like they are so important. They are just a huge part of my life right now, but that's mostly because they're young. And I think we do a disservice to our kids when we make them our own drive.
Yeah, I remember feeling that feeling of just the mundane for those 1 or 2 years that I was full-time stay-at-home parent. And That was the time in my life when I started a band and built arcades for my children and started play groups. And the young child age is a blast. It is hilarious, but it's really hard in the sense that it can be really lonely.
Yeah, and I would say perhaps the experience I've had as a stay-at-home dad is that when our community there's mom groups.
Mm.
There's groups where stay-at-home moms get to interact with each other. And those dad groups, while they do exist, they are harder to find.
Yeah, I haven't found one. Have you?
I haven't signed up for any of their stuff because it's 40 minutes to an hour away. Like it's a meetup for all of our area,
Mm.
not just our neighborhood or even our city, but for the whole county, the whole district. And so yeah, it's harder to connect with other dads, even though we exist out there. Stay-at-home dads, we exist, dozens of us. But it is harder to connect, and I think sometimes culturally harder for some reason to find that connection with other dads in that same situation.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think a lot of the research around mental health and how it affects men differently is probably reiterated in that experience that you've had as a stay-at-home dad.
Yeah, but I even know like in our community, the men who are working dads don't connect with each other.
Mm.
And I think that's as a whole something that I've learned that we can work on is men being willing to ask for help with mental health, but to find friendships with each other, which is something that I also think the research shows that men aren't great at.
Mm.
And adult friends are hard anyway, but finding an adult friend and being like, "Hey, you want to hang out?" is trickier than it should be. But that's an experience I think a lot of us share.
Yeah, I love that because I think it relates really neatly to what this podcast is about, which is that gender roles have evolved and men need to push themselves to have those vulnerable connected experiences. Women have learned to be more assertive and had to advocate for themselves in the workplace, but really we just have to find what works for us. And I think that's one thing that I'm really grateful for, that the last 3 or 4 years for us, you've been stay-at-home dad and I've been primary breadwinner, and it's a little kooky when you think about it, but I think it's been the best thing for our family. So maybe then to talk more about that evolution of gender roles. I know both you and I, probably since we first got married, I think probably our views of gender roles have evolved quite a bit. Um,
Sure.
what kind of things do you feel like you've changed your mind about, or maybe what do you feel like you're currently learning or maybe unlearning?
I think I've learned that our gender roles aren't a definition or shouldn't be a definition. It doesn't need to define again who we are. It's not who I am, right? My role as a dad is a big part of my identity, but that has evolved and changed as it's needed to. I've learned to be less protective of gender roles, which I think plays upon a religious upbringing. I'm not as protective. I'm not as like, that is my right, that is my responsibility. It is like, yeah, like I have responsibilities as a stay-at-home dad. And when I was a working dad, I had responsibilities. But to be less protective of that, maybe that's just it, is how we be less of a gatekeeper for how people live their life. And
Mm.
also and maybe something that I'm still trying to learn is how can I be a better voice? How can I show what I've learned better? How can I speak up for others better?
I think that's what allyship is all about. It's all about finding ways to use your strengths, your privilege, your identities to build bridges for others. What would you want other men to know about being a better ally, whether that's at home, in the office, or in their communities?
Okay, ready? I'm going to quote Shakespeare
Oh,
for this one. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. That's from Hamlet. That's my little pedantic segue into the need to be teachable, the need to be open to learn somebody else's perspective. And I use that quote because I think it's really easy, especially in religious community, to find comfort or at least be comfortable in how something's always been. And equity can only happen when we make an effort to see beyond ourselves. And again, I like that quote a lot because I think in religion we like maxims. We like pithy quotes because they summarize difficult things to understand. But the problem that becomes is it's like taking the plot description in the back of the book and saying that's the whole book, just the plot description. And when we do that, for one, we don't look beyond, right? We don't look beyond what that description is. We don't ask why it's been summarized like that. And we kind of put ourselves into corners, we limit ourselves. And I think that starts for men particularly to start to ask those questions, find the origins of these pithy sayings, and then on your own be more welcoming, be more open, be more understanding and willing to answer, or at least think about, not even answer, but think about differences or hard questions. And I feel that all parents, all of us who are parents, regardless of gender, want to raise our kids with the belief that they can achieve whatever they want to achieve. And again, this lies in what men can do better, I think, is we believe all of our kids can achieve whatever they want. And then it hits, I don't know, college age, it hits early teens even. And then we really say, oh, you can do whatever you want, but maybe that job isn't a good fit, or maybe that business idea is too risky. And specifically with young girls, we're like, oh, you can be whatever you want as long as it fits a specific role that we've handed you. And I think what I've learned as a stay-at-home dad and the dangers of that is that for one, I don't think that it's a malicious idea or done with damage in mind. But I'll just say that like it's so beautiful seeing my daughters when they play games that they want to be the doctor, not the nurse. They want to be the businesswoman. They want to be something so incredible and so beautiful. And as a stay-at-home dad, I love seeing that because I know they see you as their mom. And even me, they see me as their dad. There was a sweet moment with one of my kids when in school they were talking about people's moms and people's dads and what typically in this area, because it's so religious, I was like, well, the mom is at home with the kids and the dad is at work making money for the family. And my son told me, he raised his hand and says, no, that's different in my family. And differences in viewpoints are so important and key to a better future.
You said the thing about our daughter, which I've had similar conversations with her, where she said, Mom, I want to paint your nails. I want to paint nails when I grow up. And I said, Oh, you want to be a nail artist when you grow up? And she said, No, I want to own the nail salon. And I just love that ambition. And I love that you see that. We are so lucky to see that in our children. And I think it's important that we teach our children that they don't have to be boxed in based on one type of identity. I think too that we know that children and even adults, that it's easier for our brains to categorize. And so sometimes we see an identity like gender and we want to make certain assumptions about a person because of that, because it's just like that's how our brain works, and that's why it's called unconscious bias. It's not a bad thing. Everybody has some form of bias, but we have a responsibility to unpack that a little bit. And I think that's what you said really beautifully. You're a very spiritual, philosophical person, so it's kind of rooted in that. But I think towards this audience of how we can be better allies at work, that absolutely applies. That anytime we get stuck in what we've always seen done in the office, what we've always seen leadership looking like, which we'll see studies and research that say we still tend to associate leadership with masculine characteristics. And I think we just have to say, that's how it was done. That doesn't mean that
Sure.
that's the best thing for
Yeah.
the future.
Yeah. And if we were to create a pithy saying, embrace the differences, embrace the unknown, and be teachable, be reachable, be able to ask those questions and try to see something different, or at least try to understand something that's different.
Yeah, and I think I'm so grateful that we were kind of forced to think about things differently because of the roles that you and I have each filled in our family. And I just think that's the coolest thing that we're doing for our kids that we were kind of forced into is we are teaching them about gender equity every day by letting you be the kind of dad who gets up with them in the middle of the night and me being the kind of mom who is able to chase career ambition. Anything else you would want to say?
I had an interaction a year or two ago with somebody who was raised by a stay-at-home dad, and she told me how just seeing that difference in the home, she was okay thinking outside the box, doing things differently. And that was a special moment for me. I've been doing this about 4 or 5 years, and it was like 2 or 3 years into it. And I was just like, yeah, this is different for me. There is a lot of different interactions I have with people because of it. Like the old lady asking when I'm walking around Target, like, "Oh, are you babysitting today?" And just want to make a T-shirt that says, "I'm not babysitting. I'm their dad."
Oh, we should sell that.
We should, right? and and it's just like no one has to be a stay-at-home dad to see these things. They just have to be willing, I don't know, to think about it.
I'm so lucky to have a male ally in my corner every day. As we strive to break the bias, men and women have to work together. Men have to lift women in the workplace at the same time that women lift men at home. We need working dads and working moms, just as we need stay-at-home dads and stay-at-home moms. Gender equity is not just advancement for women. It's a better world for everyone. Because I've experienced firsthand what it feels like to transition from a female majority career to being the only woman in the office, I knew that when my husband and I had that fated conversation on the couch, that I would get involved in the conversation around gender allyship. In my first real job, I launched and led the women's group at work. I read books like Lean In and Hood Feminism. I volunteered to teach workshops and lead social coalitions. Eventually, I even got paid to share my story. Most importantly, I started posting on LinkedIn and learning in public. I started listening to those who commented or corrected me. For the last 3 years, my writing and research has centered around improving equity for women at work, creating allies, not enemies. What I found is the inevitable and beneficial byproduct of empowering women is that we also empower men. The patriarchal system may benefit one gender, but it damages everyone. Instead, we could let women be smart and men be pretty. Let women be assertive and men be sensitive. Let women work and men care for children. Let women speak and men listen. Get everyone out of boxes. While this podcast is geared toward male allies seeking to improve women's experiences at work, these conversations are for everyone. Yes, men can use their power to champion women in every setting. But ask any woman if she's experienced female rivalry, and you'll understand why this podcast is for women too. In all cases, gender allyship is a natural starting point to advocate for all underestimated groups in your organization. An important note here, the gender spectrum is infinite and beautiful. However, for the purpose of this podcast, I will most frequently speak in the binary, addressing male allies and women's issues, because there is still a lot to do in this space. Of course, I'm learning in public even now, so never hesitate to reach out with kind correction. As Maya Angelou said, do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. At the end of each episode, I'll share an allyship microaction that you can start using right away. Today's allyship action, name your privilege. I know, I use the word privilege. Please don't stop listening. Privilege does not make you a bad person. Privilege is not an evil thing. In fact, privilege can become your greatest tool for allyship. Take a second to Google the wheel of privilege. This is a visual that helps us to name the advantages we've experienced in life, both those that we have earned and those we were born with. For example, one segment of the wheel might be labeled ability. Able-bodied folks would be at the center of the circle, meaning that they have the most power and privilege. People with some disability would be a little further from the center of power, and individuals with significant disability are marginalized all the way at the edge of the circle. This means that they experience significantly less power and privilege than folks near the center, those of us who are able-bodied. This example makes sense to most people. If you are free from disability, it's easier for you to enter a restaurant with stairs at the entrance. It's easier for you to see objects in front of you that are required for your daily work. It's easier for you to interact in social situations. Other segments in the wheel of power include citizenship, wealth, housing, body size, mental health, sexuality, education, skin color, and yes, gender. As you look at the wheel of privilege, notice where your identities lie. Are you close to the center of power, or do you live along the margins? Being near the center isn't a bad thing. You may have been born near the center, or maybe you worked really hard to move your way over. Regardless of why you are where you are, if you are near the center of power, it is your responsibility, delight, and privilege to build bridges. That's why we're here, to be allies at work and in our communities. Here's what's coming.
I'm a man. I will never have the experience in the workplace that a woman will have.
They did the best that they could, but it could have been better if they had heard more voices.
Allyship is being able to take a little bit of time off to go have a daddy-daughter date and be able to talk about it.
The way he talked to me was like, no, you deserve to be here. You're going to shoot for the stars, so tell me where we're aiming.
If men can actually start to get in touch with their own archetypal feminine, it doesn't emasculate them whatsoever.
It was like genuinely the first time I felt seen. She was just such a wonderful ally.
If you're using your privilege in the right way to help those who don't have it, that's the key. That's what allyship is.
So yeah, we're going to get into the good stuff. Learn more, do better.